It's the weekend and you have financial questions that need answering. That can only mean one thing. It's time for Jill on Money, the show that takes the mystery out of your finances. Here's your host, Jill Schlesinger.
Welcome, welcome. It is Jill on Money, the program that helps take the mystery out of your financial life. We are delighted you're joining us. We are broadcasting from the Capital One Bank virtual studios. Capital One, this is banking reimagined. What's in your wallet? It seems like a funny thing to actually think about what's in your wallet now. It should be like what's in your digital wallet. People still using cash. I know it's kind of dirty and disgusting, but you know what I mean. You still got some cash in the wallet, so know what's in there. It'll help you. Okay. We've got a good guest for you. We're doing double down on guests during August while Mark and I are taking a little vacation. Today, we are talking about the current mortgage market. And we are so delighted because we have a great guest, Mike Raimi from Luxury Mortgage. It's not just Luxury Mortgages, it's just the name of the company. But most importantly, Mike's been on the show before. He's very well versed in the mortgage market and will tell you what you need to know right now. Here's my interview with Mike Raimi. I want to wind the clock back a little bit. There seemed to be a period right around March-ish where rates plummeted dramatically. And interest rates, obviously the Federal Reserve moved the overall benchmark down to zero. And I remember emailing you at that time and saying to you, what are the rates? And you had pointed out very early on that there was a big difference between the new purchase interest rates and refinancing interest rates. So can you explain why that is, Mike?
Typically, purchase rates are marginally better than refinance rates. Not always across the board, but that's pretty typical for a common market or normal market. I think with the pandemic, we're anything but normal as it relates to mortgages. So what happened was when the states went on lockdown, the Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Ginnie Mae all recognized that the impact on the economy would be likely significant job losses. So as well as, people not able to make their payments going into forbearance, they were kind of up in arms, didn't know what to expect. So what we saw was, for lack of a better way of saying it, a knee-jerk reaction. They put significant overlays, higher credit scores were required, limited loan to value for refinances. The purchase market kind of stayed steady, as you alluded to, and the rates were pretty good there. But we saw some significant limitations on transaction types just because there was so much uncertainty in the market. When the immediate lockdowns came, there was the anticipation that the jobless numbers were going to be horrific. We didn't know how they were going to treat loans that went into forbearance. So during that time where they were kind of figuring out what was going on, we saw significant shakeup across the board. That has relaxed quite significantly. While it took several weeks, more than several weeks, we're at a point now where I think we're back to a somewhat of a normal market, not back to where it should be. Most lenders have adjusted. Ginnie, Freddie, Fannie put out their guidelines regarding forbearance. Rates are at historic lows almost across the board. You're just seeing some different overlays, different lenders. Some lenders won't do refinances for investment properties. Some are requiring higher credit scores. But for the most part, you're seeing a market that the volume is significant, especially for refinances. And rates are at historic lows.
So what else has changed in terms of the mortgage process? So let's say I look at my house or my apartment, my co-op, and I say, it's time to refinance. Will I need anything additional to make that process go more smoothly? Let's do that, like sort of the most important things you've got to have ahead of calling your mortgage broker. What should we have ready to go?
In the current market, you see so many people that are either on furlough or been laid off. So that requires us on the underwriting end to do extra work. If you're furloughed, when are you going to be back to work? If your pay has been cut by 10 or 15%, when is it going to resume to normal? Do you qualify in the 10 or 15%? So I think from a consumer perspective, be prepared to do extra work to verify where you stand employment-wise. So there's extra work you're going to have to do. Be leery of the questions you're going to be asked. Understand the process is going to take longer because there's more work we have to do on our end. While it's getting back to a more normal process, there's still extra work that you as a consumer and us as the underwriter will have to do. So be on the lookout for that.
So you're saying you can actually refi if you are furloughed? That is a possibility?
You can underwrite the loan while you're furloughed. You can't close until you're back at work and have at least one pay stub.
Aha. Okay. Now, let's say that I have a boatload of equity in my house. I never ever had a home equity line of credit. I understood that banks were really clamping down on HELOCs. Are you still finding that now, a few months into the mission?
We saw some of the HELOC lenders completely stopping any new applications until they figured out kind of what was going on. We're now seeing some of the players come back in the market. We are offering them. There was a period where we were not. I think you see the same thing with many lenders across the country, that there was a time, whether it's a month or a month and a half, that they weren't offering those. Now they are being offered with limitation. Pre-pandemic, you had some HELOC lenders going to 100%, more so going to 90%. I think now you're seeing more limitations, maybe to 80%, maybe to 85% of the value of the home. They're back in the market. Some, those that are back in the market are more limited. It's just, I think, a more limited number of players in the market, and those players that are in the market more limited on how much they're going to lend.
So if I have an established home equity line of credit, is it possible? I'm playing devil's advocate here now a little bit. Let's just say the economy craters again in the fall. Is it possible that by the time I want to withdraw my money, that the bank, once that credit line is established, says, we're yanking your credit line? Is that possible or not?
Yeah, it happened in 2008 where you saw lenders freezing credit lines across the board. So I think that's absolutely possible. They won't call the note due, but they can certainly freeze it. So if you have a line of $100,000, you've taken out $20,000, they might freeze it and say you can't take out any more.
That's like an arbitrary thing they can do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We saw it. We saw a ton of it in 2008.
This is one of the things that I think is really important, that if people think that they are relying on that home equity line of credit as the emergency reserve fund, hear this message. The bank can freeze the line just at the moment where you might need it. So it's great to have a home equity line of credit, but be very careful. Mike, it was interesting. Before the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, before that launched, I remember having conversations with a couple of small business owners. And one of the first things I said was, draw down your line of credit immediately. I remembered that as well, that they froze lines of credit. Now, I'm not sure if they did it as much this time around, but I think that if you are relying on a home equity line of credit to be an emergency reserve or to be your extra business line of credit, whatever it is, be very careful about that because, as Mike said, can change pretty dramatically. Okay, we'll get back to Mortgage Mike in just a second. During the break, why don't you do this? Take a deep breath before you start going and figuring out whether you're going to refi. Go and subscribe to our sister broadcast. It's called Jill on Money. It's a podcast. You can get it on Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, radio.com, Google Play, wherever you find your favorite podcast. We'll be right back.
Back to Jill on Money, where Jill Schlesinger helps you take the mystery out of your finances.
You're back. It's Jill on Money, and we are very happy to have a guest this hour, Mike Raimi. He is a mortgage broker, been a mortgage broker forever. I've known him for a long time. And we have been getting inundated with questions about the mortgage market. Obviously, interest rates are at all-time lows. I mean, these mortgage rates are insanely attractive. But of course, that doesn't necessarily mean that everything's hunky-dory because we are living in a pandemic. So in this part of our interview, we want to focus in on what's going on amid the pandemic. How have lenders adjusted to this environment? There are millions of people out of work. There are a bunch of people who are furloughed. There are some people who've taken a cut in pay. Some of it is temporary. Some of it could be permanent. We don't really know. What I think we need to focus on is whether or not the conditions right now are attractive enough for you to consider the refi process or even the new home process. So here is more of our interview with Mike Raimi. Now, you've been in the business a long time, and I'm wondering now if you, as you look at the lending landscape, how are the financial institutions managing their risk? I know that their underwriting they have to be more careful, but are they anxious to be writing loans right now, or are they sort of sitting on their hands? Is it really tougher to get a loan?
I think it is more difficult to get a loan. I've always been one to say if you qualify, you qualify. If you don't, you don't. But I think there's more to be said, especially in the current market, is lenders are definitely a little concerned and not knowing, what's going to happen next. Is there another wave? Or maybe it's one big wave. But I think you're seeing, like I said, underwriting more cautiously, requiring more documentation, heightened credit score requirements, lower loan to value. So I think lenders are seeking to mitigate the risk and not lending at the liberal way that they were pre-pandemic. There's so much uncertainty in the market that you're definitely seeing some lenders, a lot of big banks, for example, I know, and I won't name, but aren't even taking refinances unless you have a certain amount in depositories with them. So you're seeing that with a lot of banking institutions. There's definitely different banks that are very cautious, non-bank lenders that are also being cautious. So I think they're lending. They're just lending in a more cautious way.
And how would you compare the spreads? So the 30 versus the 15 versus the 5-year ARM. What's going on in the marketplace? Here we are in July. What's the general trend?
Yeah, I mean the rates are low. That is clear. Rates are extremely low, historic low. In terms of the spread, I don't think you're seeing anything out of the norm. Your 30-year is typically a little bit higher than your 15. The 20 falls in between. Adjustable rates, 5-year, 7-year, are strong for a jumbo loan. Fannie and Freddie aren't really players in the ARM market. They're more the 15, 20, 30-year fixed. But I think you're seeing normal spreads low across the board.
I want to talk a little bit about the types of people that should and should not refinance. Now, I remember when I spoke to you about my own mortgage back in March, you came back to me and said it's not worth it. So who should not refinance a mortgage in general?
I think the bigger picture is that just because the rate today is lower than your current rate, and a lot of people look at it this way, the rate today is 0.5% lower than my current rate, I should refinance. No, I think you got to take a much deeper dive. A couple of things I would point out is people that shouldn't refinance, if they start with a 30-year fix and they're 20 years in, refinancing clearly doesn't make sense because you're at the point now where you're paying significant principal. So almost across the board, that doesn't make sense. There are certain exceptions, maybe going into a 10-year fixed if the rate is lower. But in a situation like that, you can almost rest assured it doesn't make sense to refinance. What I like to do is I take a deep dive with all of my clients. I don't just look at the rate. I look at there's opportunity to shorten the term. But what you need to do is in determining whether those make sense is you got to look at a cost analysis. What are your closing costs? What does the amortization look like? It's very black and white for me is I plug the numbers into an amortization, compare it to what their current rate is, see what the interest savings are, match it up with what the costs are. The numbers don't lie. Either you're going to save money or you're not. And then I also look at how much time do you plan on remaining in your home? If someone says, well, I'm moving in a year or two, well, clearly it's not going to make sense. So I think it's important to look way beyond just the rate, take a deep dive with all the calculators we have at our disposal. It's easy to determine black and white whether it makes sense or it doesn't. The numbers don't lie.
Now, there are some people where I have experienced where they'll call the show or they'll contact us and they want to buy a home and they can get pre-approved or pre-qualified. And yet I'm mystified that they can because their situations are a little sketchy. Are there some people who, almost out of the gate, are just going to get hosed if they buy a new home with a mortgage? I mean, in terms of whether it's the rate or perhaps they're going to get themselves in a situation that could be a little dangerous because they're putting so little money down. What are the characteristics of people that you say, like, gosh, it just doesn't seem like you're not going to get this loan right now. Or if you do get the loan, it's going to be really expensive. So you might as well wait. Who are those kinds of people?
The last thing you ever want to be is house poor. You don't want to put every dime to accommodate the required down payment. You have zero savings. So one of the biggest things I look at is that. I also look at the monthly payment. Where is it in relation to what your income is? If your income is variable and you rely on a bonus, for example, or commissions, you might qualify today, but who knows where your commission is going to be next year. Just because you qualify doesn't mean you should buy a house. Do you have reserves? Underwriting requires a certain amount of reserves, but just because you meet the guidelines doesn't mean you should be buying a house. For me, I always want my clients to have at least 10 months of reserve. That's my magic number. And it's going to vary from lender to lender. The guidelines probably require 3, but I want my borrowers to have 10 months in reserves, just because you never know.
It might be a good rule of thumb even now, even though we hate rules of thumb, but just to consider that since we don't really know what's going on in the universe, in the COVID universe, right? To imagine that if you're going to go out and buy a house, pretend what would happen if you took a 20% haircut on your income. That could happen to a lot of different people. Or if you're a 2-income family, what would happen if one of you lost your job? You really have to be pretty honest with yourself, right? Like, am I really at risk or not? And I think that that's something that it must be hard for you because, I know that people are so excited when they go through the home buying process that they just want, like, oh, we've qualified. And then, you don't want to be the buzzkill, but people like you and me, we can often be the buzzkills because, we know better. We've seen the bad stories as well. So Mike, what about the loans where you're putting down less than 20%? I don't know how much you are involved in those loans, whether they're FHA loans or the loans where you have to pay private mortgage insurance. Have those types of loans remained popular?
Yeah, I think Fannie Freddie, a conventional loan, will allow as little as 3% down, and that hasn't changed even in the midst of the pandemic. I think we saw some changes with FHA. We're seeing still allowing the 3.5% down, but more significant credit score requirement. So yeah, I don't think we've seen significant changes in those guidelines. If it's for the purchase of a primary home, the minimal down payment is still allowable.
It's tough for me to think about paying private mortgage insurance. It's a drag.
Yeah, private mortgage insurance is a drag. It's temporary. On an FHA loan, it's not temporary. It's for the life of the loan. But on a conventional loan, Fannie or Freddie, PMI is required when your down payment is less than 20%. And it can be eliminated again once you do have the 20% equity piece. But yeah, you're paying, on a monthly basis, depending on what your credit score is, depending on what the loan amount is, it could be $100 to $400 a month.
We'll get back to Mike Raimi in just a second. Hey, if you want to know about what kind of house you can afford to buy, you know what a good idea is? You can go to the New York Times website. And it's really easy to do. And it's the NYT Rent versus Buy Calculator. I highly recommend it. I think we might even have a link to it on our website. Just go to the resource section of JillOnMoney.com. We'll be right back.
Do I invest here? Should I put my money there? Jill Schlesinger can help you. Back to Jill on Money.
You're back. It's Jill on Money, and now it's time for the quintessential Jill on Money question. Should you refinance your mortgage? Well, I'm not answering it by myself. I've got a great guest joining me today. His name is Mike Raimi. He's a mortgage broker. We're going to talk about the refinancing market and when it does make sense, but when it may not make sense. So if you're thinking about a refi and you don't know, and you're wondering, should I do a 15? Should I do a 30? Should I jump in? Pay attention. This is the segment dedicated to you. Here's more of our interview with Mike Raimi. Is there an opportunity for people to refi if they are paying private mortgage insurance, or does that automatically, do you call them up and say, send the appraiser over, or do the deep dive on me, release me from my PMI? How do you get released from PMI without a full refi? Is there a way to do that?
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is lender specific. Obviously, the refi route is pretty clear. If you get an appraisal and it shows you have 20% equity, then you're not going to have PMI in your new loan. There is another avenue, again, lender specific, where once you have 20% equity in the property, you can contact the lender and they can do either a full appraisal or what they call just a desktop appraisal where they review internally if the value is there. Yes, it's always worth calling your lender if you believe the equity piece is there and asking what their process is to eliminate PMI.
What I learned during the pandemic is through executive producer Mark Talercio, smartest, best producer ever. He was able to do his appraisal remotely. Mark, was it during March? Is that when it happened, or April? I forgot when this happened. Okay, so it's April. It's really like we're on serious lockdown. Mark and his fiance are in the process of doing a refi. And he's like, I don't want an appraiser in my apartment. So he calls up the appraiser, and the appraiser's like, well, just take some pictures, send it to me. And it all got approved. Is that still the case? Like, what's happening with appraisals amid the pandemic?
That's true. And there's various ways where you can get around having an appraiser come to your house right now. And I believe it's temporary. So one, there's certain situations where an appraisal isn't even required. Often you see that where there's a high equity piece or higher credit scores. In the event an appraisal is required, we are allowing, and most lenders are allowing, exterior only appraisals with certain limitations and guidelines. And if an exterior isn't allowed, like to Mark's point, they'll let you get away with just sending photographs to the appraiser. So accommodations are being made across the board in consideration of not wanting to have someone else in the home.
Okay, Mike, once and for all, a 15 versus a 30, what's your analysis, and how should people approach making that decision in your mind?
15-year fixed is going to provide a lower rate, obviously a significantly higher payment because the loan is amortized over 15 years. 15 versus 30, you're going to save significant interest on the 15-year fixed. But it's not right for everyone. You need to be able to afford it. And afford it means not just because you have the money to make the monthly payment, but you need to have a significant amount of comfort level with that, right? So just because you can barely make the 15, you shouldn't be doing it. So, hey, if you can comfortably make it, if your income is significantly higher than what the payment is, then absolutely go for the 15. Why not pay off your debt? In my opinion, in a shorter period of time and save significant interest. But again, it's along those lines, as I alluded to before, taking the deeper dive, running the numbers, see if it makes sense.
Aunt Jill's going to take the other side of this. Mike and I have had this conversation forever because my theory on this is hang on to your cash flow, especially if you're a young family. Put your 20% down. I'm not a fan of putting less than 20% down, but I love a 30-year mortgage because it provides more flexibility. And frankly, you can turn a 30-year mortgage into a 15 or 20-year note, maybe when your cash flow is better able to absorb it. So unless there is some really important reason in your psyche that you have to do a 15, why not do a 30, give yourself some flexibility, maybe 10 years into the mission, you start accelerating the payments. What's wrong with my thinking, Mike?
For me, paying off debt as quickly as I can, I'm laser focused on that. But I think to your point is a good one. And no question, you can always turn a 30 into a 15. From a flexibility perspective, I think it does make sense. So I am not opposed to that at all.
Thank you very much, Mike. Okay, now we had a lot of people who were freaking out a few months ago about house hunting or listing their homes. And now we're some months into the pandemic. Presuming that people have jobs and they've run their numbers, you feel comfortable saying, okay, get back on your house hunting and move ahead? Like, what's your feeling right now?
So I do. It's a competitive market right now for sure, depending on the price range. But especially homes below $1 million, you're seeing multiple offers. So it's a hot market. Inventory is low, demand is high. So I think if you're truly back on your feet, furlough is not something you see in your future, and you're real confident of that. Then yeah, I think it's a really good time to buy a house because rates are so low.
Well, thanks so much, Mike Raimi. We really do appreciate him being a go-to guest. And, I know we get a ton of refinancing questions and mortgage questions. If you've got a question, shoot us an email, ask Jill at jillonmoney.com. That's what Deborah did. She writes, "Hi, Jill and Mark. I listen to your show every week and I enjoy the great advice you give, even though we have $0 in investment accounts. My husband is a spender. I'm a saver, but it's hard to rein him in." Okay, here are the facts. My husband is 70. He retired at 50. He collected Social Security. He collects, Social Security, disability insurance, and a state pension. Okay. I'm 67, says Deborah. She collects Social Security. She works part time. Their home is worth about $300,000. The remaining mortgage, $62,000. And the interest rate, 5.875%. Should we refinance? We still have 14 years left on the current mortgage. Would it be worth the refinance charges? Appreciate any advice you may have. Thank you in advance for your input. It's hard to actually refi notes that are under $100,000. If you could do it, sure, but I want to make sure that you guys actually have the wherewithal to keep the mortgage amount low and to really absorb the cost. As you heard Mike say, if you don't run the numbers, you don't know. So at least I would check it out. I would see how long it would take to recoup the costs and see if anyone will write a mortgage for that small amount. One thing to consider is if you want to look at the refi, maybe what you could do is could you refinance to a shorter term, to a 15-year, maybe even a 10-year. But again, you've got to run the numbers. All right, I hope that helps. When we return, more of your questions. Our email address is askjill at jillonmoney.com. We'll be right back.
.401ks, IRAs, refinancing, she covers it all. Back to Jill on Money with Jill Schlesinger.
You're back. It's Jill on Money. This is the program that hopefully takes the mystery out of your financial life. We are delighted that you are listening to us, and we never take that for granted. So promise that, you guys put in your side of it, which is you tune in. We put in our side, which is we answer your questions. If you have any financial concerns, why don't you just shoot us an email? Ask Jill at jillonmoney.com. I did a recent segment on CBS this morning. At the end of the segment, what happened? Gail King, our anchor, made a funny joke like, "Oh, we're going to put up your cell phone number." But at the end of the segment, I said, "Oh, no, just tell everyone can email me." And then everybody did email me. So thousands of emails came in. Here's one of them. Jennifer writes, "I understand why folks with a family might need a will, but what if you don't have anyone? My husband of 25 years plus died unexpectedly back in January of 2017. We never had children. Financially, I'm close to a negative net worth. I don't have any savings or cash assets. I'm making a living, but I'm deeply in debt from keeping my small business afloat. To be honest, I feel terrible thinking about wills and powers of attorneys. I don't want to sign my mess to anyone. Is that really so wrong? I would be delighted to hear what you think." Well, I guess, Jennifer, there's a couple of things. Whatever you have, even if you have negative net worth, then that's fine. There won't be an estate. There's not a big problem. I guess what I understand is that, because when you don't feel good about your financial situation, this is something you really don't want to think about. But I do wonder, I don't know how old you are, but well, what if something about your health were to come into question? What if you had to assign somebody the right to make a healthcare decision on your behalf? What if things change? I don't know. I would still do it. Maybe even just do it online. Would that be okay? Could you try to do that? Gosh, it would really be so much better if you could do something. Okay. Gail writes, I just listened to your advice on CBS this morning. My husband and I each have a will, a durable power of attorney, and a healthcare proxy and a trust. My question is about my unmarried adult children. They're in their 20s. One is in the military and will be going to grad school in Spain. Should they also have a durable power of attorney and healthcare proxy for emergencies? I'm most concerned about the healthcare proxy. Do we need one for them? If so, does that paperwork have to be produced and notarized by an attorney? Or can we use the online state forms, we live in Florida, in which signatures are witnessed and notarized? I'm not asking for a legal opinion. I'm just asking if I could speak for my children if they are suddenly incapacitated without the forms, or should we get them? Thank you. I always enjoy and learn from your interviews and reassuring advice. Sincerely, Gail. This is an interesting one. I would say that it's probably worth having the adult children put their wishes down. And, the real reason is that we want to make sure that they voice what their wishes are to you, and then you can execute them. Generally speaking, I think that the family would be able to step in and make a decision. But if it's a decision that might be contrary to medical opinion, then I think you really do need something that's written down. You know what I mean? That is a question there that, especially if you need something specific to happen, or maybe, for you, you'd say, gosh, I'd really like my kids to have a full funeral. I'm making this up. Like, I want there to be a religious aspect, but the kids say, no, I don't want that. So I think it's good having a conversation. I think that makes it at least palpable to everybody. And you could potentially do it online, but I think it's worth having these conversations. Okay, Annie writes, just watched you on CBS this morning with Gail King, and thank you for your advice. My spouse and I are childless. Each of us have separate state residency in Illinois and Florida. Do you have any advice on estate attorneys? We have received conflicting information that we both have to live in the same state. Your comment on irresponsible was to the point, because I said about people who don't do their estate planning, that it's irresponsible. And, I think that that's something that resonated with a lot of people. Okay, Annie, you each have separate state residency, meaning that you're in one state and your spouse is in the other. I think wherever you should, I don't know. I don't know if you have to live in the same state. I think that the estate attorney that you hire should be in the state of residence, and maybe, just maybe, and I have a good sense about this, especially because it's Illinois and Florida, there's plenty of estate attorneys who are admitted to the bar in both of those states. Why? Because people from Illinois often have houses in Florida. So I would give that a try first. And if you run into an issue, maybe we can find you an estate attorney who will be able to help you in both of those states. Irene also saw me on CBS this morning. She says, I'm a fan. I appreciate your advice. I have a will with all three components you mentioned. My question is related to my son. He's 31, has returned to college to complete his education. He's unmarried, no siblings or potential wife at present. He's got no property. He's the heir to my property and assets. Should he have a will? If your answer is yes, how does he set it up since there's no significant other? Thank you in advance for your advice. I mean, look, if you have no assets, it's not that big a deal. I think going to an online will production site, Willmaker is one, and LegalZoom is one, and get some documents in place. I don't think that's the worst idea in the world, especially because of his age. Mostly, again, we want people to name their healthcare proxies and their durable powers of attorney, the people who can act on their behalf. So I hope that helps. Thanks, everyone, for writing, and thanks so much for all these great viewers for CBS this morning. It's Jill on Money. When we return, we're going to answer more of your questions. During the break, hop on to JillOnMoney.com. You can listen to past shows or any part of this one if you've missed it. We'll be right back. You're back. It's Jill on Money. And before we finish up this hour, I want to remind you that we are broadcasting from the Capital One Bank virtual studios. Capital One, this is banking reimagined. What's in your wallet? All right. Let's finish up with some of these estate questions because I think they're really very smart. And I'm very happy that people are writing in about this. It's nothing like a pandemic to get you to pay attention to estate planning. Gosh. Okay. So Marilyn says that she saw the piece on CBS this morning and she said, I was reminded I must take care of business. Marilyn says, I am 70 years old, no spouse, no children, don't own any property. My problem is I don't have anyone to choose as an executor, power of attorney, or a healthcare proxy, which is why I haven't proceeded. I live in New York. Any suggestions? Well, Marilyn, a lot of people in your situation, what they'll do is they'll choose actually a friend. Or do you have nieces or nephews? Do you have anyone who's close to you who could essentially take over that role? And it doesn't have to be your best friend. It just has to be someone you trust. That may be the best solution here. I've been involved in some of these situations where people take nieces, nephews. They've also done friends, but they've also done more distant relatives who at least they're in touch with. Someone who you think will just execute your wishes. And I think that's not a terrible ask, but see if it works for you. I know it's tough, very tough. Okay, when we come back, we've got a great interview. It's author Dan Pink. He wrote a book called When. It's all about the timing. Just want to remind you that there's a lot of information on our website, jillonmoney.com. You can read articles, listen to past shows, watch TV segments, and also sign up for our free weekly newsletter. It's free. Okay, we'll be right back.
It's the weekend, and that can only mean one thing. You're listening to Jill on Money, the show that takes the mystery out of your finances. Here's your host, Jill Schlesinger.
You're back. It is hour number 2 of Jill on Money, and we are broadcasting from the Policy Genius virtual studios. Policy Genius is the easy way to compare and buy insurance. All you have to do is go to policygenius.com. I was just talking about Policy Genius because I was saying that there are some industries that are very hard to navigate on your own, and insurance is surely one of them. We love the CEO of this company. Her name is Jennifer Fitzgerald, very smart, and can't believe that no one else has figured out a way to make this process easier. Well, Jennifer has. Hey, this hour we've got a great guest, famous dude. His name is Dan Pink. He wrote a book called When: The Scientific Secrets of Perfect Timing. And I really felt like this book spoke to me in many ways. I think it will to you as well, because I think we have a sense of our natural rhythms being completely knocked out of bounds because of the virus. Maybe we can refocus. Here's my interview with Dan Pink.
You've just written a new book. It's called When: The Scientific Secrets of Perfect Timing. And I loved it.
Thank you.
Let's start by explaining sort of the natural cycle of how we as human beings are programmed. So talk about that and how this might have encouraged you to dive deeper into the topic.
Yeah, well, I mean, the reason I dove deeper into it was in part for that reason. I was frustrated because I was making all these decisions in my own life and making them in a haphazard way. And while I'm a little bit messy, I'm pretty anal retentive about decision making. And so I like to make decisions based on evidence. It didn't exist. I looked around and realized there's this incredible body of science out there that gives us clues about how to make these decisions. And so one of the cornerstones of all of this is exactly as you say, there is this pattern of the day that happens inevitably. And to simplify it, each day we move through a peak, a trough, and a recovery. Peak, trough, recovery. Most of us, about 80% of us, move through in more or less that order. Peak early, trough in the middle, recovery later in the day. People who are night owls, who have what's called an evening chronotype, much more complicated, actually much more interesting people. I'm not one of them.
Nor I.
But they tend to hit their peak much later in the day. And what we know from this mountain of research is that our brain power doesn't stay the same throughout the day. It changes. And in each of those periods, our brain power is different. And so finding the right thing to do in each of those segments allows us to do more work and better work.
When you started talking about sort of the night owl versus the lark, there was also a third category.
Sure.
And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So this is something what's called a chronotype in a field called chronobiology. And it's
Which is like you'd like to whip out chronobiology at your next cocktail party, right? Like, let me tell you about that.
Yeah. I mean, it's really simple. Chrono, time. Biology, study of life. It's basically scientists who study our rhythms, essentially.
Yep.
And what we know is that each of us has different types. So we talk about morning people and evening people, and that's not folklore. That's actually real science. And here's what we know. 15% of us, very strong morning people, larks. About 20% of us, very strong evening people, owls. About 2/3 of us, though, are in the middle, what I call third birds. And third birds, I mean, to oversimplify, you can think of kind of owls and non-owls, really, in how these patterns go. Most of us go peak, trough, recovery, but about fifth of the population has very, very different rhythms and very, very different internal schedules.
The point of kind of understanding what kind of person you are is to make sure you are working around those normal cycles.
Absolutely.
And not putting yourself in a position where you are forced to do something at a time where you may not be, obviously at your optimal cognition and energy and all of that.
Absolutely right. And what's interesting about that is that there are different kinds of cognition that work differently in each of those periods. So let's take that peak. The key characteristic of the peak, which again for most of us is earlier in the day, for owls in the evening, is that we're high in what psychologists call vigilance. Vigilance is just our ability to bat away distractions. And so that makes the peak the ideal time for doing heads down, focused work, analyzing data, writing a report, those kinds of things that require that kind of intensity. Now, what's interesting is that the recovery period, which is later in the day for most of us, late in the afternoon, early in the evening, our mood is high, but our vigilance is not. And that makes it a good time for things that require some kind of mental looseness. So iterating new ideas, brainstorming, certain kinds of creative problem solving. And so you should be doing your more kind of looser, creative, iterative stuff in that peak period. And what we know is that time of day matters in human performance. If you look at, let's take a typical workplace, all right? And we know something, let's talk about the statistical concept of variance here for a moment, okay? Variance. So you got a workplace and there are 1,000 people there and you plot them from bad to good. Who's bad and who's good,
right?
In terms of their performance. And how do you explain why some people are better at their jobs and some people are not? Some people are smarter than others. Some people are more conscientious than others. Some people work harder. Some people have more social advantage, whatever. But what this research tells us is that 20% of the explanation of that variance in performance is time of day. And that's something we can do something about. I can't make myself smarter,
right,
but I can actually do the right work at the right time.
And so when you look at that, let's just say someone's listening and they have got a team of 50 people, okay? And what is the way to take that knowledge and structure a day potentially differently?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think what's interesting about this is while we have general patterns, there is considerable individual variation. So a lot of the things that you see in like life hacking sites, everybody should get up at 4:30 in the morning, is nonsense. It doesn't work that way. And so each individual collection of people is going to be a little bit different. But what I would do, let's say you got 50 people, I actually would want to know their chronotype. I would want to know who are the larks, who are the owls, and who are in between. And it would also depend on what I was doing. So let's say I had let's say I was running an accounting firm. Okay, unlikely, but let's say I was running an accounting firm, and I had 30 of my people were larks.
Okay,
all right, or 30 or larky at least. With those folks right there, I would not put them in a staff meeting at 9 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock in the morning, 11 o'clock in the morning. I would not lard up their calendars with meetings during the morning because I know that that's when they're highest in vigilance and that's when they should be doing their heads down accounting work, auditing a financial statement or doing that kind of thing. So I would leave them alone for that. If I wanted to come up with, say, let's figure out a way to do, what's a new line of business that we could create? I would have that conversation generally later in the day. Now, I would also see who my owls are, if I have any owls. And for the owls, what I would do is essentially leave them alone and let them tell me when they are at their best. And if that owl wants to do her audit at 9 o'clock in the evening and she's not in her chair at 9:30 in the morning, I'm good with that.
Right, just get the work
done.
I
want her to do the work when she does it.
We'll get back to our interview with Dan Pink in just a minute. Hey, during the break, here's something to do. Follow us on social media. Haven't told people to do that in a while, huh, Mark? Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, our handle @JillOnMoney. We'll be right back.
Back to Jill on Money, where Jill Schlesinger helps you take the mystery out of your finances.
You're back. It's Jill on Money. And I have an embarrassing admission to make. All right. I am a little compulsive when it comes to certain aspects of my real life and even my personal life. One thing that I consistently do is I obsessively manage my inbox. I clean it out, I look at it, I make sure it's cleaned out. It drives me crazy when I don't do it. Well, according to our guest, Dan Pink, who wrote the book When, The Scientific Secrets of Perfect Timing, I may not be doing myself any favors. Here is more of our interview with Dan Pink. Again, the book is called When, so we're focusing on when.
So for me, I would sometimes come to my office at 8:30 in the morning, and the first thing I would do is answer my email. Okay? So it takes me an hour to, clear out my email, and I have this delusion that, I've cleared the decks. My head is free. Okay?
Right.
So it's 9:30, and it's like, oh, wow, I'm kind of hungry now. Like maybe I'll go get a bagel, all right? Then I come back. There's probably something going on Twitter, all right? And then, 4 sports highlight reels later, it's lunchtime, and I haven't done my most important work.
You're writing.
My writing, okay? And the thing is, as a Jill, as a writer, anytime you sit down to write, at that moment, the universe begins conspiring for ways to distract you.
Oh, yeah.
And so you want to do it at your highest vigilance. So I actually changed my way. So when on writing days, I go into my office, still at 8:30, because I'm not an insane, start working at 6 o'clock in the morning, lark. What you know what I do?
What?
I don't answer my email. I don't even open my email. I don't even bring my phone with me into the office. I give myself a quota of words and say, during this period of peak vigilance, Dan, you have to crank out these number of words.
Wow, that's fascinating.
And then did you do it the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day?
I'm really interested in this because I think that there are so many of us who are juggling lots of different tasks that we have to do throughout a day. And so what you're saying is work to your strengths, do this task in the morning. And this is so weird because you're saying this and this actually happened to me yesterday. So I have to wake up and check email just to make sure I don't have to be on the air, right?
Sure.
So which is annoying, but okay.
Sure.
But I put it aside, I shut down my email, and I cranked out 3 scripts and 2 columns. And 2 hours later, I was like, oh my God, I'm done. And I took the dogs out for a walk after. It was beyond fabulous.
That's how you do it. And the thing about email, let's go back to my accounting firm here. What I might want to do is tell my larky accountants, you know what? Check your email, make sure, an important client hasn't contacted you.
That's right.
You know, some kind of just like basic maintenance and things like that. But you want to do your heads down focused work in your peak. You want to do your iterative work during your recovery. And then this trough period.
Yeah, let's talk about that. What do we do then?
It's a terrible time of day.
I hate it. Well, I am the ultra lark because I wake up between 4 and 5.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. But sometimes I have to be on the air, so it's different, right?
Right,
so,
right.
but like so I generally wake up between 4 and 5. And I looked at your little schedule there, your graph, and I sort of, okay, I know where I am.
Yeah, so you're pretty larky.
I'm very larky anyway, and it's a long day. So what do I do in the trough? When I'm kind of like, I can even feel it. I physically feel that trough.
We all do. Most of us don't acknowledge that, though. And most of us say, oh, well, it's some of us are like, oh, it doesn't matter, or oh, it's a sign of moral weakness.
Yeah, let me power through it.
Right.
I'm like, no, I'm done with that. I don't want to power through anything.
Powering through is a really bad idea. All right? We tend to and unfortunately, somehow, especially in our business culture, we've been conditioned to believe that that's how you get more work done, that's how you get better work done, that powering through is also morally virtuous. And it's nonsense. So what you should be doing during that trough period, one, your work that doesn't require as much brain power and creativity, answering your email. The other thing that you should be doing, especially in the trough, is taking more breaks. There's a whole science of breaks that's been emerging, and what it tells us is exactly that powering through is a bad idea. Taking breaks is a good idea. We should be taking more breaks, and we should be taking certain kinds of breaks.
And what are those types of breaks?
Well, the best breaks, and there's some interesting research on this, the best breaks are social rather than solo, which surprised me. As an introvert. So this is true even for introverts. The best breaks are moving rather than being stationary. The best breaks are outside rather than inside. And this is important, the best breaks are fully detached rather than semi-detached. So a break isn't, walking around with your nose in your Snapchat feed. It's actually being detached.
Let's talk about me for a second.
Of course.
Whatever's
my favorite topic.
So I got these dogs almost 4 years ago.
Okay.
And almost at the exact same time, I had to stop running just because of an injury.
Ooh.
And so I found that walking the dogs was the most unbelievable thing because it forced me outside. I don't generally like to talk on the phone while I'm walking the dogs.
Yeah.
Sometimes I listen to a podcast, because I'm obsessive, but I came up with good ideas. I thought about things that were work-related, non-work. It was sort of like my meditative moments. And I found myself so much happier I used to be like, oh, if I don't run 5 miles, I suck. But now I feel like I walk every single day. I walk 5 miles a day with my dogs, generally speaking. Going outside, I think, is huge.
The dogs force you to do that, but there's an amazing amount of research. I think it's been overlooked about what being exposed to nature does for us. It improves our mental and physical health. There's some fascinating research showing in urban areas where simply putting in a park or replanting a hollowed out block can actually improve health outcomes within that 1 mile radius.
Can you talk a little bit about how the personality traits, because the ocean, the openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, which I feel like I have all of those maybe at different points in the day. So you said that, I'm just going to quote from the book.
Yeah.
Much of the research shows morning people to be pleasant, productive folks, introverted, conscientious, agreeable, persistent, and emotionally stable.
Yeah.
Now, I found that fascinating as someone who works in the mornings.
Yeah, well, or someone who's a lark.
Yeah.
There are personality differences, and let's take the other side of it. So let's talk about owls. Owls are more prone to depression. Owls are more prone to other kinds of mental illness. Owls are more prone to addiction, but owls also test higher on both analytic intelligence and creativity. And so I think the interesting question there is which way the arrow points. Is it that people who have mental illness have a difficult time getting up in the morning and going to sleep at night, or does going to sleep late and waking up late increase your chances of having some kind of problem? We don't know that, but there are these personality differences. I think that the implications for workplaces, though, back to my accounting firm, is that if I say that the main criterion at Pink Partners Accounting is that people have their butts in their seat at 8:30 in the morning, I am losing 1/5 of the talent pool, including the fifth of the talent pool that tests higher on analytic and creative intelligence. That's a mistake.
Let's shift gears and talk about lunch. Can you talk a little bit about fueling, refueling, all those fun parts of the chronotype?
Right. But on lunch, we can think of lunch as, let's think of this big category of breaks. And lunch is just another category of break. And what the research tells us is that at some level we have overvalued breakfast and undervalued lunch. Okay, I'll put it in investing terms. All right, I'm going to short my shares in breakfast, and I'm going long on my shares of lunch.
It's like a day part kind of spread that we're putting on.
It's absolutely, because I do think that that if you look at the actual research on breakfast, it doesn't say breakfast is bad, not at all. It says breakfast might be good.
Yeah, and it's not as good as you think it is, probably.
Yeah, and it basically says, hey, healthy people eat breakfast, but we don't know whether eating breakfast makes them healthy. It could be that healthy people just like to eat breakfast. And also, some of these studies have been funded by breakfast food companies.
Funded by Wheaties.
And so you gotta take it with some degree of skepticism. My view, I'm very agnostic on that. Eat breakfast if you want, don't eat breakfast if you don't want. But lunch, because it's in the middle of that workday, is valuable because it is a break.
We'll get back to our interview with Dan Pink in just a minute. Why don't you send us an email with your financial question? It's so easy to do. It's Ask Jill at jillonmoney.com, or just go to the website, jillonmoney.com. On the upper right-hand corner, there's a contact button. Hit that button, and you can ask a question that way as well. We'll be right back.
Do I invest here? Should I put my money there? Jill Schlesinger can help you. Back to Jill on Money.
You're back. It's Jill on Money. Aren't we all learning about the different rhythms of our life during a lockdown and the pandemic and working from home? It's so crazy. Mark and I are the kind of people who like to work out in the morning. That's us. Anyway, being aware of what your body wants and needs is the focus of this part of our interview with Dan Pink. We're going to talk about who needs a nap among us. I know some of you are thinking, I can't nap. Maybe you can. Dan Pink, author of When, The Scientific Secrets of Perfect Timing, he's got a method for you to really figure out how to get a darn good nap. Here's more of our interview with Dan Pink.
Just being aware of your own body is fascinating to me. And that's why I love this book, because so much of it felt like, yes, I could bring that into my life and make a positive change. So let us talk about my favorite word in the entire book, nappuccino. By far the
so
best.
Are you a napper?
I can be, because I wake up so early.
Right.
And so there are, it can sort of happen in the mid-afternoon. I've sort of been thinking like, I should be meditating, and actually napping feels better.
You know what? But it's interesting you say that, because there are a lot of similarities in brain function and just in mood between napping and meditation. There really are. Here's what we know about napping. It's pretty good for us. Again, it goes against our puritanical ways. But the best naps are extremely short, between 10 and 20 minutes long.
That was what amazed me.
That surprised me, too, because I began this pretty anti-nap, because my own experience napping was unpleasant, because I would wake up and I would feel like crap. And that's what something called sleep inertia, which happens when you nap beyond about 20 minutes. But a 10 to 20 minute nap there's a lot of research on this. It's very restorative. It's right in that sweet spot. Less than 10 minutes doesn't do you much good. More than 20 gives you sleep inertia. Right in that 10 to 20 minute window, it really just smooths things over and restores a lot of mental acuity, restores some physical energy.
Okay, so now add in the caffeine part.
Okay, so this is something I swear by now. I don't do it every day at all. But
look at you! You're like, don't judge me.
Yeah,
I don't do it every day.
No, I don't do it every day. I want to advocate this, but I'm not. I don't want to be like you're not
an evangelist.
A pusher on the corner, like handing out the drugs here. Here's what I do. So I have noise canceling headphones, and so I will set my timer for 25 minutes. Put on my noise canceling headphones. Right before I press go on my 25-minute timer, I will have a cup of coffee, and I just guzzle it. In fact, I will often brew a cup of coffee, put like some chunks of ice in it just to cool it off because I'm not enjoying the coffee. I'm just guzzling it. All right? Seems weird, but stick with me. So then I close my eyes, have my noise-canceling headphones on, and I can usually fall asleep in, say, 10 minutes. And one of the things that we know about napping is that the more you do it, the better you get at it. And that, in that sense, it's very much like meditation. If you just take somebody off the street and say, start meditating, they're going to have a really hard time. But you bring them back day after day after day after day after day after day after day, at a certain point, they're going to be able to meditate from 10 seconds to 30 seconds to a minute and a half. So napping is that way. So I can usually fall asleep in 10 minutes. I fall asleep in 10 minutes. My alarm goes off in 25 minutes. That gives me 15 minutes of actual nap, right in that sweet spot. But here's the cool thing. Caffeine takes about 25 minutes to get into our bloodstream. So at that moment that I'm waking up, okay, ideal nap, no sleep inertia, I get this other boom, this boost of caffeine right at there. And that's why it's called a nappuccino.
Oh, I love that so much.
It's awesome.
And
I mean, it really works. What's interesting about that nappuccino is that I have gotten a lot of email about that from readers who particularly, two kinds of email. One, it allowed me to survive the military. Two,
oh, wow.
It allowed me to survive graduate school. I never knew it had a name. I thought I was the only one who did this.
That's so awesome. One of the things that's kind of cool about your book, one of the many things, I should say, and the book is called When: The Scientific Secrets of Perfect Timing. Daniel Pink is our guest. Is that you have these little guides and that are after the chapters. I really like that. And, you know, you talk about find your trough time. And you said the Mayo Clinic says the best time for a nap, and this is generally speaking, is between 2 and 3.
Yeah.
But if you want to be more precise, take a week to chart your afternoon mood and energy levels. Yeah. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, it goes to something you were saying before, is that we need to be better observers of our own being, in a sense. So our own body, how is our body responding? Our own mind, both the way our kind of traditional cognition is working, but also how we're feeling. And we don't do a very good job of that. We kind of neglect that. And our body is, and our minds and our brains are telling us things. And so if you pay attention to that and systematic about it, you will say, wait a second, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I am completely spaced out. So let's not have that important meeting at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Let's not schedule that phone call at 2 in the afternoon. You know what? At 2 in the afternoon, I'm going to close my door with my noise-canceling headphones and big cup of coffee. And there's certain things that you should do at 9 in the morning that you shouldn't do at 2 in the morning, and vice versa. You
also make a really interesting turn in the book about about goal setting and using certain days as triggers.
Oh, yeah.
Why is the turn of a calendar? Why is Rosh Hashanah for Jews important? Why are these days? Why do they become important in terms of the timing of when you set goals?
Yeah. They're enormously important for a whole set of reasons, because part of the science of timing is not only these daily patterns, but how do beginnings of any kind affect us? That's what we're talking about here. How do midpoints affect us? How do endings affect us? And there's some really, really beautiful, interesting research on what social psychologists call temporal landmarks. That's what you're talking about, temporal landmarks. And there's certain dates that stand out in time the way that physical landmarks stand out in space. So if I were directing somebody to my house in Washington, D.C., there's certain landmarks that I would tell them to look for to find my street. I'd have a smallish street. It's not one of the, but it's off of a really big street. And it's complicated because of Washington has certain streets that are on diagonals and certain streets that are parallel, and I'm on a diagonal and it's small and blah, blah, blah. So my view is like, look for Cactus Cantina Restaurant.
There you go.
All right?
Get a margarita and come over.
So they see Cactus Cantina Restaurant, and what do? They start slowing down,
right,
becoming more aware. And that's what happens with these temporal landmarks.
Okay, we'll get back to Dan Pink in just a minute. During this break, here is something you could do. Go check out JillOnMoney.com. That is our website. Mark has a beautiful resource section, tons of stuff there. So check it out, JillOnMoney.com, the resource section. We'll be right back.
401ks, IRAs, refinancing, she covers it all. Back to Jill on Money with Jill Schlesinger.
You're back. It's Jill on Money. If you're just joining us, we are very delighted to have you, but you've been missing a fantastic interview with Dan Pink. He is the author of When, The Scientific Secrets of Perfect Timing. You may have actually seen some of his other books, Drive and To Sell is Human. He's very interesting, very readable. You know, a lot of people who are thinking about their careers right now, it is a tough time. But according to Pink, he says this whole concept of a midlife crisis may be a misnomer. You know, it may not be that the middle of your life is where something's going on. He's got reams of research that he relies on to come to these conclusions. So it's not like he just came up with an idea and he pulls it out of his head. He actually tests a lot of the theories in the book, backs it up with data and with science, which is one of the reasons why he's become so successful. So here is more of our interview with Dan Pink.
All right, now let me just show you something I marked up in your book.
Yes.
Do you see that? Do you see that midlife thing?
Yes.
Do you see what I circled there? Do you see what my age is? I'm right smack in the bottom 53, age 53, well-being slumps in midlife. Wah, wah.
I am 54, so I feel your pain.
We are there. What is up with this?
This is some really, really interesting research on two dimensions. First, we talk about this idea of a midlife crisis. That's complete bunk. There is no evidence of a midlife crisis. It drives me nuts that people actually even use that term because there's zero evidence of that. But something else I think more interesting happens in midlife, and is basically what researchers call a U-shaped curve of well-being. It's not a crisis. The bottom doesn't fall out, but there's a dip, and the dip is around, in general, around our age. And the chart you're pointing to is a chart from Angus Deaton, who's a Nobel Prize-winning economist at Princeton. But the U-shaped curve of well-being that he and his team found is similar to what researchers around the world have found. This is not an American phenomenon. This is a international phenomenon. This U-shaped curve of well-being in midlife, that is, we're happier in our 20s and 30s. We begin to dip in our 40s, really, hit the bottom of that gentle U in our 50s, and then generally start going back up, has been found in something like 70 countries. If I were to show you that chart, and then say, if I were to show you that chart and not identify it, and then show you the chart of well-being over the lifespan in France, and then say, here's the well-being over the lifespan in United Arab Emirates, you would not be able to tell the difference among those.
Interesting. So, I mean, you attribute this one possibility, the disappointment of unrealized expectations. So I would just say that, look, when I looked at this chart, I was fascinated by it because, first of all, there's a huge drop down as you get to be sort of like in your 20s.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of kids in their 20s are like, I should be at the top of the world. Why don't I feel better? So I feel like it's like a nice explanation for, like, you don't have to feel so good because you're learning a lot. But you know what? After going through 2 divorces, I can tell you that, like, my well-being shifted because of those experiences early on.
Sure.
I'm wondering what your advice might be to navigate if someone is sort of feeling that unrealized expectation, or just feeling like, my kids are out of school, out of my house, I've lost my purpose. Maybe you were the stay-at-home parent or whatever. What is the advice for getting through the trough?
It's a great question, and as you say, we're talking about large population samples. So people, not everybody. This is not like there's a cold front is meeting a warm front, therefore inevitably it's going to rain. This is large populations and general patterns, and everybody doesn't abide by it. But I think there are a few things that people can do and we don't know the reason why. Actually, we can speculate about that, but we don't know exactly the reason why. I think one thing to do. There are all kinds of things that we can do. One of them is gratitude. There is enormous, as you know, Jill, there's enormous research on gratitude. And so what you can do is you can say, well, okay, I'm not the CEO, but what am I grateful for? Oh, I have a happy marriage. Oh, or I have these great friends, or I'm in perfect physical health, or
Poo. You would never say that out loud if you were Jewish.
Whatever.
And challenge the gods to get you.
But you know, it's like what am I grateful for? There's actually this really interesting technique built on a lot of research, which I really like. It's an interesting mental exercise called mental subtraction of positive events. And so what you do is you think about your life, something good that happened to you, and then you pretend it didn't happen.
Oh, this is like that Christmas movie.
It's a Wonderful Life.
It's a Wonderful Life, right?
Totally. That's a very important movie psychologically. So anyway, I'll leave that aside for now. So you mentally subtract a positive event. So let's say, I don't know, what's a positive event in the first 35 years of your life?
Whatever, like, that like I had a job, I had success, I had nieces and nephews, whatever.
Okay, so let's say you had whatever your first great job in journalism was.
Right.
Imagine if that didn't happen.
Right.
You might not be here sitting with me, and that would be a deep disappointment.
I'm already disappointed considering that it could have happened that way. It's horrifying.
But I think about I think about it. I got 3 kids. It's like, geez, like what if like one of my kids wasn't born?
Oy.
I know. It's like okay, suddenly every niggling little irritation goes away. Here's the other thing: is that if you're at the bottom of this, U-shaped curve of well-being. Some people who are the glass half full type will say, hey, you got nothing but up.
That's right. I got my upside.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll get right back to our interview with Dan Pink. We will conclude it during the break. Shoot us an email. Let us know what's on your mind. Ask Jill at jillonmoney.com. We'll be right back. You're back. It's Jill on Money. Let's finish up this interview with Dan Pink. He's so smart, so great, and I think really opens my eyes. I hope he's opened your eyes. This segment, we're focusing on why the aging process is actually your friend. Here's more of our interview with Dan Pink.
The preponderance of evidence is that older age is a much happier time than we realize. For a couple of reasons. And there's some great work done on this by Laura Carstensen at Stanford. And she looked at friendship networks. And what we typically see in the size of people, forget not like Facebook, but like real friends. Right?
Yeah.
So if you look at the size of friendship networks, they grow. In the 20s, 30s, they grow. 40s, 50s, they grow. But around age 60, they start to drop. And sometimes significantly. And she was puzzled by that because that is superficially the story of isolation and despair and loneliness. And what she instead did is she unpacked that, and she had the people, as she examined their friendship network, she said, okay, divide people into groups. Inner circle, middle circle, outer circle. Inner circle, people you can't live without. Next circle out, people you really like. Next circle out, yeah, they're cool too. And what she found is that all of the decline was in the middle and outer circles. That, and then in some instances, that inner circle actually grew a little bit. What we know is that intimate social connections is one of the things that makes us most satisfied. There's a famous Grant study from Harvard where they had it's all men, it's all white men, where they followed these men for decades and decades and decades. From the time they were undergraduates, they did another one of some working class people in Boston, and as you follow them through, it basically, like, who's happy and who's not. And Robert Waldinger, the Harvard guy who's running this program now, says, it's basically happiness is love, full stop.
That's it.
You have people who you have people who you care about. You have people who care about you. Boom.
We want to thank Dan Pink so much for joining us, and we want to thank you for listening to this show. If you have financial questions, just send us an email, ask Jill at jillonmoney.com. Don't forget, we have been broadcasting from the Policy Genius virtual studios. Policy Genius is the easy way to compare and buy insurance. Go to policygenius.com. Thank you so much for listening. Wash your hands, wear your masks, and maintain that physical distancing. Do something nice for someone. We'll catch you next week.